Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Remixing Politics and Culture with me, your host, Pam. I am a public relations and marketing professional that happens to have a passion for social justice, voter advocacy, and culture. And tonight, we have a very special show for you. I hope that everyone is doing well. We've had quite an exciting day. And I hope that everyone is being laser focused at what is at stake this November. This truly is a historic moment in time for very obvious reasons that President Biden has stepped out of the race for the presidency and has endorsed his vice president, Kamala Harris. If we stay focused and extraordinarily focused and not be typical Democrats, we can beat this party of darkness that the party of Trump has proposed last week during their convention. Tonight, we have our panelists back per your demand. 2 weeks ago, we did a show on unraveling civil rights in the United States. And tonight, and we dabbled just a little bit into Project 2025 those couple of weeks ago. And tonight, we're going to focus in on the manifesto known as Project 2025, which definitely puts an emphasis on unraveling of civil rights. My distinguished panelists, of course, are back to share their wit and wisdom on this important discussion. I want you all to know that tonight's show is dedicated to the late Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee of Houston, Texas. She was a phenomenal leader and champion of civil rights. May she rest in peace and in power. Okay, so now it's time to introduce our guests, our panelists, for them to come back with us after 2 weeks away. Coming up first, I have attorney A.L. Newhouse. She is Chief Crisis Conflict and Culture Strategist of New Image Communications and Mediation. KL is a 25-year practitioner and subject matter expert with a robust practice in media crisis consulting, information, disruption, media training, and more. I'll ask you to turn your mic off for right now because I'm getting feedback. Okay. She is also a certified DEI trainer. KL has a forthcoming book due out later this year on trauma. From the West Coast state, the Sunshine State of California. Welcome, KL, to the show. You can unmute yourself. Say hello.
Hello, greetings, everyone, and particularly to our illustrious host, Pam, for convening us and reconvening us for this historic moment that we had no idea was coming today.
I had so many text messages telling me to do this, do that. I cannot tell you. My text has gone crazy. All right. Okay. So next up, I have who almost scared me because he came on slow tonight is Trevor Coleman. Trevor is a C-suite speechwriter, author, strategic communications expert, and a national award-winning multimedia journalist. For nearly a decade, Trevor served as Director of Communications for the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. He is a certified diversity and cultural competency trainer and a recipient of the Michigan Department of Civil Rights Distinguished Service Award in 2009. Trevor is the co-author of 4 college textbooks and the author of the award-winning biography of a late civil rights federal judge, Damon Keith of Detroit. Currently, Trevor is the executive speechwriter for none other than the Office of the Attorney General of New York, Letitia James. So now you can understand her command when she gets up in front of that microphone. I can't help but to think of Trevor every time I see her. Welcome back to the show, Trevor.
Thank you very much, Pam. It's very nice to be back with this panel.
Okay, all right. Okay, and next up, I have Professor Jerry Gershonhorn, who is a recent retiree from North Carolina Central University, where he was the Julius L. Chambers Professor of History. He specializes in 20th century United States history, African American history, North Carolina history, and media history. He taught at North Carolina Central for 29 years. He is the author of 2 books, Melville J. Herskovitz and the Racial Politics of Knowledge, and the award-winning book, The Lewis Austin and the Carolina Times, A Lifelong Black Freedom Struggle. Professor Gershonhorn has written numerous articles on African American history. Welcome back to the show, Professor.
Thank you so much, Pam, and thank you for convening us again to talk about these important issues, and particularly Project 2025.
Absolutely, and the chat is already lit. And guys, I'm not ignoring you. I'm just trying to do 2 things at once. Okay, and last and certainly not least is my favorite Gen Zer. Is my favorite Gen Zer, Greer Webb. Greer is a phenomenal young man. He's a scholar, having been a Kane Moorhead Scholar at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He is currently on a full scholarship ride at Emory University School of Law, where he is now officially in his 2nd year of law school. Greer is currently a legal intern with the Federal Defenders Program Incorporated, which is a criminal indigent defense group. Greer is a much sought after commentator and speaker. Welcome back to the show, Greer.
Thank you, Pam. I appreciate you, and I'm looking forward to this great conversation about Project 2025.
Okay. So how we're going to do this, guys, in the audience, let me, oh my goodness. It's so many. I got to acknowledge everybody. Okay, Mary. Okay. Oh. Vice President Harris is about to be elected to another Black job, President of the United States. I hear you, Mary. Mary is my good friend out of Portland, Oregon. Hello, I voted for her to follow Joe. Okay. Hey, Lori, rest her soul. She was a dedicated fighter and will be missed. Yes, she's your sorority sister, as is KL. She's your soror, Lori. Hello, people. Okay. Alicia. Hello, everyone. Mary. Hello, Alicia. Okay. All right. Lots of hellos. Okay. I just am trying to acknowledge all you guys. Okay. Hey, Doc. That's Ron Charles. Everybody. Okay, guys. Everyone. Greer. Showy. Okay. All right. So, Professor Jerry Gershonhorn, I want to, we're going to do the show similarly to the way we did it 2 weeks ago. But I want you guys to know Project 2025 is so huge. It's about 900 pages. So what I asked our panelists to do is to look at sections that lit their fire and that they have some expertise in. And I thought that would make for a more robust conversation, and it would make it more, it would make it better for all of us, because it would be something that they really were into and engaged in. Okay. So Professor Jerry Gershonhorn, our historian, is going to give us a historical background of the people and the organization that have given us this Project 2025 manifesto, the Heritage Foundation. Professor Gershonhorn.
Okay, well, thank you, Pam. Yeah, so I want to talk a little about the history of the Heritage Foundation and its relationship to Project 2025. The Heritage Foundation was started about 50 years ago in 1973 with funding from Joseph Coors, who was the president of Coors Brewing Company out in Colorado, which has long funded a lot of conservative far-right organizations. Initial funding was only about $250,000, much less than the organization has today, but that got them going. And the founders were two Republican legislative aides, Paul Weyrich and Edwin Fulner. And their basic goal initially was to counter liberal views on taxation and regulation and basically prop up corporations, the wealthy, and that type of thing. So when you think about 1973, this is during the tail end of the Nixon administration, 7 years before Reagan was elected president. And many of the goals back then are similar to what they are today. The organization, essentially, if you looked at their ideology, you could characterize it as white Christian patriarchal domination, and also focus on corporate and the wealthy. So they have been long about opposing anything that would create a more fair and just society for people of color, for gay people, for women, for working class people, for non-Christians. And if you look at the very beginning, Paul Weyrich also was a co-founder of the Moral Majority with Jerry Falwell, which is very important. Their background of the Heritage Foundation comes out of this kind of Christian, what we today call Christian nationalism. And Weyrich, when he was trying to get support, he was trying to kind of motivate the evangelicals to support and get involved in politics, which prior to the 70s, they were not that involved, certainly to the extent they did later on. And it's interesting the way he was able to get them involved. A lot of people think, well, it was about anti-abortion or opposition to women's rights, but at the beginning, it was about race, which is probably maybe not that surprising to a lot of people. And what got them motivated was when he started telling them that the IRS was rescinding tax-exempt status for Bob Jones University because of their racially discriminatory policies. At the time in the 70s, and all the way up until 2000, in fact, Bob Jones University did not permit interracial dating, among other racist policies. And so that's what got the evangelicals actually going and helped to kind of be the impetus for this establishment of the Moral Majority, which Weyrich started with Falwell in 1979, which was a year before Reagan was elected. Mm-hmm. And so the Heritage Foundation proceeded to, from its very beginning, produce these basically books of policies for these Republican administrations. The first one was back in 1980 when Reagan was running against Jimmy Carter, and Reagan won that election. And it was called, just like the subtitle today, Mandate for Leadership. And in 1981, it was called Mandate for Leadership, Policy Management in a Conservative Administration. And in fact, it was 3,000 pages long that time. It was actually lengthier, and so many of the policy initiatives were similar. There were some differences, which happened later because of Trump's, particularly his slant on politics. But to show how influential it even was back then, at Reagan's first cabinet meeting, they passed out copies of this 33,000-page conservative manifesto policy initiative, and by most account, about 60% of the Heritage Foundation policies and plans were either implemented or were embraced by the Reagan administration. One of the plans was to terminate the Department of Education, which is still a plan. And one of the important differences, I'll just say that the Heritage Foundation basically has produced almost every 4 years has produced another policy initiative called Mandate for Leadership with different subtitles. Mm-hmm. So in 84, 88, almost every, I think there was one year they didn't do it, one presidential term, I think in 96, maybe they didn't do it. Maybe they thought it was a foregone conclusion that Clinton would be reelected. But back in the 80s, one of the big differences was that when Reagan came into power, the Democrats controlled Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And the Supreme Court was not weighted toward the conservatives and the far right as it is today.
Right.
So the situation is very different. So if we jump ahead to today and look at the situation, and if Trump was able to get elected and the Republicans took Congress, you have a extreme right Trumpian Supreme Court with a supermajority 6-3. And a lot of times what happened in the past is that many of the initiatives were stopped by the courts. But there's less hope of that given the imbalance on the Supreme Court.
Right.
Also, if the Congress, as I said, goes Republican, and there's also some more initiatives, more extreme initiatives, because the Heritage Foundation and the Trumpers feel that they didn't succeed as well as they would have hoped to in the first Trump administration. So I'm sure the other panelists will talk more about those. But just to mention one, is this plan is to change many of the civil service positions into political appointees.
Mm-hmm.
And they plan to do about 50,000. Generally speaking, each president appoints about 1,000 new political appointees.
Mm-hmm.
They want to create, and there are only about, I think, 4,000 or 5,000 political appointees in the executive branch. But they want to create another 45,000 to 50,000, change them from civil service, which are basically experienced experts on various topics, whatever agency they're in, and remove them. And not only would it create an extreme far right group of officials, bureaucrats, it would create an incredible dysfunction because they would have no experience operating in these agencies, whether it's environmental, whether it's Department of Justice, civil rights, whether it's women's rights, climate change. I mean, they want to get rid of the term climate change at all.
Yeah.
Professor,
let me interject quickly here. One of our guests asked, "How is the Heritage Foundation funded?"
Yeah, good question, and it's funded. I mean, not obviously solely by the Coors Brewing, but by corporate interests. And so they do the work of corporate interests. That was their initial mandate, was to oppose regulation. And think about regulation. That means environmental regulations, climate regulations, clean water, clean air. It means regulations about civil rights. It means regulations about women's rights. If you think about Paul Weyrich and the original founders, they came out of the Goldwater presidential campaign in 1964, when Goldwater was, defeated handily by Johnson. But Goldwater was really the first major shift to extreme right-wing republicanism and really strong anti-civil rights. I mean, Goldwater opposed the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65. Prior to that, even with Nixon in 1960, when he ran against Johnson, it was kind of up in the air between Democrats and Republicans who was going to be stronger on civil rights. And of course, it shifted particularly toward the end of the Kennedy administration and then through the Johnson administration. But it's largely right-wing corporate interests. I heard Pete Buttigieg being interviewed recently, and they were talking about how Silicon Valley, a lot of the the wealthy capitalists in Silicon Valley, these tech millionaires and billionaires are supporting Trump. And they asked him, well, why are they supporting Trump? These tech guys are supposedly a little bit more liberal. And he says it's not complicated. The rich support the party that supports policies that benefit the rich.
Yeah.
And and that's what it's been about since the 60s, certainly, and if you go back in other forums even before that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you so much for that extensive background, Professor. And I think that gives us a bit of a framework to understand what this where this originated from, and that it's nothing new. And I would dare say that we are seeing some of its policies already implemented when you look at states like Louisiana, when you look at a lot of the number of the southern states of some of the policies that have been enacted in their local legislators, we see it. Definitely, they're
Absolutely.
Tennessee.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's happening. There are portions when I was looking at things about the Project 2025, you can see correlations of things that are happening right now. So, Trevor, I'm going to come to you next. I want to ask you to please, I know, because you told us that you've had to do a lot of extensive research on Project 2025 for the Office of the Attorney General for the state of New York. And with the research that you've discovered, how do you feel that the Project 2025 manifesto, if implemented, would impact our justice system as we know it? You're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think first and foremost, let me just address something that Dr. Gershenhorn had said when he talked about the impact on civil service. If you look through this Project 2025, he outlined like three primary areas. But you look beneath that, and it's actually not even low key, but there is a consistent theme throughout that project, and that's its relentless hostility towards people of color, Black people in particular. Now, this attack on the civil service isn't just an attack on bureaucrats and experts and expertise, right? It's also a conscious, aggressive attack on Black employment, on employment of Black middle class. Because disproportionately, those of us who are familiar with Washington, I lived in Washington for 4 years when I was executive speechwriter to the president of the American Bar Association. I worked right down on Constitution Avenue, and plus I have a lot of family in the DC area. All of us know that when you talk about the bureaucracy in Washington, DC, not necessarily at the executive level, but people who kind of make the wheels turn. So, many of the employees are African Americans from throughout the DMV, and particularly Black women. And so, and in fact, this goes back to in the 90s when Newt Gingrich was the majority leader in the House, and they first started shutting down government, and they were saying, they're furloughing unnecessary employees. They were talking about those jobs a lot of these African American women and men do who work, for the federal government. And so basically, you have to understand the people behind this are white supremacists. While I'm on this town hall, I'm not gonna euphemisms. I'm gonna get straight. They are white supremacists. They are vowed white supremacists. In fact, when the Heritage Foundation was first founded by the Corps, and actually the Ku Klux Klan were part of the support groups. I wrote a paper about that when I was in college in the early '80s, and how the Ku Klux Klan, was protesting and part of this stuff, because a lot of their stuff, when they said regulations, a lot of that stuff was triggered by busing, opposition to busing and opposition to affirmative action, all these sorts of things. But getting back to, the question you asked now in terms of how this, affects us. So throughout the consistent theme throughout this, they're targeting the most vulnerable people. And when I say vulnerable in terms of, rights already being a precarious situation, they're attacking voting rights, they're attacking education. They want to do away with daycare. They want to do away with what the minimum health care that we have, Obamacare. And so the whole point is to emasculate the federal government in its role of supporting its citizens, and us using its tax dollars for basically human services and for education and all these sorts of things that benefit, people of color, poor people, working class people. They want to do away with overtime. Yeah, they want to bust unions up.
Yes.
Right? And so they basically are looking to deconstruct. They literally are deconstruct the entire country, the social system that we have right now that makes us a civilized and democratic nation. Because these people are hostile to us. If you talk to them, the line they use: "We're not a democracy, we're a republic."
Right.
Because that's to justify the Russians, their attack on voting, and their attack on citizen engagement and representation in government. Yeah. And so the thing is, these are very, very dangerous people. If you remember, as I mentioned this 2 weeks ago, that the Nazi Party, the proto-fascists, the Nazi Party, they got their ideas on how to establish the Nuremberg laws by coming over here and observing Jim Crow and the Black Codes. If you read Isabel Wilkinson's book, about the Warmth of Other Suns.
Yeah.
And she talks about that. And then, of course, the South Africans mimic the Nazis, in the treatment of African Americans. But the point is that the Nazis came here at the turn of the century, early in the 20th century, observed, under Woodrow Wilson, but like in the teens, in the 20s, and a little bit before that, how they oppressed and persecuted African Americans. And this is the same mentality that the Republican Party and that MAGA and the people from the Heritage Foundation have right now. They are avowed white supremacists who think that white males, heterodox males, should have primacy over everyone. Mm-hmm. And they will use force to do that. And as I mentioned again, we cannot allow the mainstream media, to kind of skirt over something that's literally a life and death matter. They also want to impose nationwide, the whole stop and frisk, and also indemnify the police, who can brutalize. Now, Attorney Newhouse can speak to this, and perhaps, Aspire Attorney Webb can speak to this. Indemnify the police, so if they brutalize protesters or brutalize African Americans, that they won't be held accountable. And also Trump, using the Insurrection Act, will have the authority to send troops into the military and also over the objections of the governors to surround these urban cities: Detroit, Washington, New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, wherever they're, Atlanta, wherever there are African Americans, significant African American populations where they have some sort of power and control, right? And so to keep us, so you talk about concentration camps for immigrants, basically kind of keep us isolated, and by brute force, and this Supreme Court, the Supreme Court, because it's far right, it's racist, just like Trump is. They'll allow him to do all this sorts of stuff. So this literally is an attack, not just on democracy, but it's an attack on our humanity. And we're going to end up looking like some of those far right Eastern European countries if we allow this to happen.
Right. It certainly is. I had found a whole list of mandates that Project 2025 wanted to refute, that they said that the media had it wrong and people had all these talking points. And they said the complete ban on abortions without exceptions is absolutely false. Really? And they said the mandate for leadership calls for the government to comply with laws that prevent federal funding of abortion. It also calls for federal support for alternatives to abortion, including adoption. All that is simply saying in a roundabout way is that, yes, we are doing this and we want everybody to do adoption and what have you. I want to know how many people, I can tell you right off the top of my head that I know, because I do work in a social services agency. It is hard as dickens to get people to do foster care. Okay. So, it's no easy thing. And so they have all of these pat answers for everything. And there's nothing.
Let me just say one last thing that's really important. Always keep this in mind. And Trump has shown them that they can get away with this. Lincoln said you can fool some of the people sometimes, but you can't fool all the people all the time, right? But yes. Trump has shown them that you can just lie, just lie, because the mainstream media isn't going to hold them accountable. And so they will tell you, oh, no, we're not going to, we don't want to ban abortion nationwide, right? Oh, we don't want to ban birth control. We don't want to ban IVF, even though it says it, it says it right in their manual. But the point is, they will just lie to you. They would tell blatant, outright lies, right? Mm-hmm. Not just Trump is a profligate liar, right? And so the Republican Party, all of them lie. And the people who are Trump's saying that he doesn't even know what Project 2025 is, right? And so now you have people from 2025 who wrote the manual now saying, because they're receiving backlash to it, well, this isn't what we meant, or they're liars. They are aggressive, they are hostile, and everybody as vicious as they appear to be. And if you give them opportunity to seize power, seize control, you will rue the day you allow that to happen. Don't believe anything they say. They are awful, awful, vile, despicable, racist people. And you can't trust anything they say.
We can't, because he lies so much. I mean, that's one reason why he really won the debate, because he just talks so much and talks over you and stuff. Like a person like Joe Biden is trying to speak factually and correctly or whatever, and he doesn't care. What comes up comes out. If he starts talking about Hannibal Lecter or whatever else, he'll start talking about it, and people are laughing or distracted, and the next thing you know, your rights and everything else is gone before long. Greer, I'm going to go to you next. And of course, we can interject and chime in or whatever. But Greer, I want to go to you next. You being the youngest among us, you chose to focus in on education. Share with us why you chose education and with the implementation of Project 2025.
Sure, I will do just that. Thanks again, Pam, for having me on today. And I want to just say a few things first, and I'll try my best to keep them brief. The first thing is I'm glad and grateful that we're dedicating tonight's episode to Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. She was a staunch advocate for civil rights, for human rights. And though I didn't know her personally, I know many people who did, and they said that she was always willing to fight for the cause of justice. And I think that's important, especially to see a Black woman fight so hard and unfortunately fall to the battle of cancer, which impacts so many of us, Black, white, and otherwise in this country, and really needs to be rooted out. And I hope we do find a cure for that disease soon. I also want to say, just so it's clear from the onset before I dive into what Project 2025 says about education and the Department of Education, that I am riding with Kamala Harris all the way to November. I'm looking forward to seeing who she picks as her vice presidential candidate. Somebody was in the chat, I think it was Brother Mark Lee, talking about making sure 18 to 40-year-olds turn out. This one will. I will be making sure that all of my friends turn out and vote, hopefully for Kamala Harris and whoever she picks for her vice president, whom we all know is probably going to be some white man from the whitest white. Because this is America. And I saw your post earlier, Pam, about Gretchen Whitmer. And I do love Big Gretch, as she's called on social media. But I'm really rooting for Kamala Harris to pick someone, again, like the chat has been saying, like Roy Cooper, who's the governor of my home state, North Carolina. He's also term limited. He's serving out his last term. He can't run again in this election, whereas the governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear, and the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, they have more terms that they could run. And so the Democrats may want to use them in that way. Somebody also just quickly noted Gavin Newsom. While I generally like him, 2 quick points on him. One, that's not going to happen from my perspective because he's from California, just like Kamala Harris. So there's no bonus state there. Also, and KL probably knows this better than I, this year, Gavin Newsom has not been great when it comes to the issue of homelessness in this country. He was on the wrong side, I believe, of that recent Supreme Court decision, and he was supportive of, policies and that I don't think serve our homeless population well in this country. And so that was alarming to me. Regardless, I am riding with Kamala Harris. It was difficult to see Joe Biden step down in that way. We were all, I think, shocked. But I do think that is the sign of a true patriot. He understood the stakes here, and the energy around him was just trailing off. And so I'll now go to Project 2025. I'm sure I'll pop back in later with some comments from my perspective as a young person. But Project 2025, as someone said in the chat, can be boiled down to one word or phrase, and that is anti-fairness. They are doing everything they can at the Heritage Foundation to remove all of these mechanisms to make life more fair here in the United States. I just want to add that I was speaking to a group of young people recently about community, and I was giving them 3 points. And I said community, and I was speaking in the faith context, but community is all about 3 things: service to others, sharing and testifying about good news, and sacrifice or surrender. We live in a society. And so this idea that many people have, and specifically white Americans, that no one is ever going to have to give up anything. No one is ever going to have to support their neighbor. No one is ever going to have to pitch in a few extra dollars. I mean, have these people never heard of taxes? I know we don't like to pay them, but we live in a country, we live in a community. And so when we talk about education, education is the foundation for everything that we do in a community. I come from a family of educators. I'm very grateful for that. And the education section of Project 2025, Pam mentioned that the whole project, the whole manifesto is over 900 pages. I'm looking at page 319 and going a few pages beyond that. The Department of Education, quote, ultimately should be eliminated, end quote. Mm-hmm. That's one of the first lines of the manifesto. You can check me if you don't believe me. And so the federal level Department of Education, these folks want to do away with three specific things, and I'll pass it on. They want to implement school choice and vouchers and get rid of this structure that we have for public schooling, which is a huge mistake. They also want to restore, and that's their word. You'll see a lot of this right? This root word of do again, and this throwback to the good old days. Mm-hmm. They want to restore student loans and grants to be exclusively in the private sector. So they want to take away public loans and grants. They want to take, and we all know what that means. I won't go further into that.
No, you can explain it.
I mean, all of the federal public programs that help college students. I mean, we're thinking of all these types of loans and grants and Pell Grants and might come to your mind. They want to shift all of these student loans and grants to the private sector, which means that they can become more selective in who they give those loans and grants to. And so that's really what I take away from that piece. They also say that we reject, discussions of critical race in education. Now, let me just stop right here and say, and it's been alluded to on this panel already, but Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who I just love, was on MSNBC recently, and she said, newsflash, Project 2025 is already being enacted in so many states.
Yes.
In so many states. We can look at Florida, where they're banning AP African American Studies. They were banning books. We can look around in other states where they're trying to ban free lunches for public school students who need help. Again, we live in a society. Our goal as people should be to help others and to glorify God. But that's not really what's in this Project 2025, as much as they claim to be Christians and evangelicals for the Lord. It also, and I'll end here, lessens federal restrictions on charter schools. Lessens federal restrictions on charter schools. And, I have many friends and people in my family, I'm sure, who have gone to a charter school at one point or another. And so I'm not anti-charter school. What I am is anti-taking public dollars and giving them to schools and giving them to institutions where there's no check on how they're using that money. And that is where I agree with a lot of people who say, I want to know how my money is being used. I want to know what politicians are doing for my community. I think that's very valid. And so when you lessen these restrictions on charter schools, it allows them to do more with our money or more with their money. And we don't know as much about what they're doing. And so I think that's problematic and troubling. Again, I'll end and toss it over by saying young people are very excited in this moment. I think this was a great decision, actually, when you think of strategy from President Biden to step down. Why? Because of what Pam and I think maybe Trevor said earlier. In that debate, Joe Biden could not get his words together because Trump was hitting him with lie after lie. Also, that Trump is a PR strategist and a master marketer. It's true. And so the Democrats have been playing this denial game for too long, and it really pisses people off, like myself and other young people who can see, we can envision the simple switches that need to take place in order to attack their lies and beat them back. And so I think Kamala Harris would destroy Donald Trump at a debate. I mean, can y'all imagine that? She already was pitted up against J.D. Vance, and she would have destroyed J.D. Vance as well. And so it's so exciting. And I think that, and I'm on social media a lot. Social media is rallying behind Vice President Harris right now. And she has started to speak about Project 2025 at her rallies. And so I want to just name this when people say, oh, a Black woman can't do it. Well, let's see if we now have the chance. Let's see if we can support a Black woman. That's really the question. She has raised over $27 million since her announcement. And also, it should be noticed that Nikki Haley voters have created a political action committee, and they're raising money for Vice President Harris because she's a woman, because she has Indian ties. And Black women have always been the backbone of the Democratic Party. And so if Kamala Harris can't do it, that's a referendum on us as Democrats and people in this country. It's not a referendum on her because she's awesome. And I'll stop there.
You said a mouthful, Greer, and I find that I did not know that Nikki Haley's people are raising money for Kamala. Now, some, but this is fascinating to me because my girlfriend, she doesn't keep up with anything. I cannot tell y'all how many phone calls I've had today and text messages after this whole thing went down. And so she says, Pam, what about Nikki Haley running with Kamala? It'll be, really cool. I said, girl, what planet have you been on? Did you not? So she had not paid attention to anything with the RNC convention. I said, Nikki got up there and did a Hail Mary to Trump. There's no way in God's name she could ever turn back. She's done. So, if Nikki had kept her fortitude and how she was criticizing him, rightfully so, and all of that, she might, you never know. But nah, she done blew the thing. She blew the bag.
She did. And I'll say before we toss it over to KL, I'm looking in the chat and trying to help you out, Pam, because it's just blowing up. People are talking about Pete Buttigieg. I really do like Pete Buttigieg. I think he went on Bill Maher recently and just destroyed JD Vance. Unfortunately, America is just not ready to have a gay vice president. I do think that's the truth. I think it's a sad truth. He's got those Midwestern ties, but we have to, operate factually. And so I'll just say that I think there are many good candidates that Kamala could choose. I'm so excited to see that people are rallying around her. Mm-hmm. It's very interesting. I'll just toss this out there for the panel that Barack Obama has not come out in support of her yet, but Hillary Clinton did. So I'll toss that out as we transition.
I'm kind of looking a little side eye at my boy Obama. I'm kind of, and I did not know until today. I did not know that it was Obama that did not want Joe, kept him from running in 2016. I didn't know that. I was just thinking all Hillary, but but Joe wanted to do it and Obama stopped him. So this is very interesting. Politics is an interesting thing, I tell you. So next up, we have KL. KL has a rather unique perspective overall on Project 2025, guys. She has a Project 2025 end game theory with an analysis to economic and environmental regulations. And that's yet a whole nother thing, that a minefield if we didn't have regulations. As you well know, it is a stated fact that a lot of these environmental hazards and places, a lot of brown and black people live in those places and spaces. And if you don't know about them, if you don't know about the regulations in our food, our environment, or whatever, then, how do you protect yourselves? How do you stay healthy? How do you, and then they want to take away national health care and stuff too. It's just a mess, complete mess. So KL, please explain to us what your end game of Project 2025 theory is, please.
Well, thank you again. I am just genuinely honored to be in this space at this time in history. So I do want to say, if you don't mind, I want to revisit real quick because I will tie the ends back together. Mm-hmm. But if I may first, like someone once said, please allow me to come in hot and ready like Little Caesars. Thank you, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who did the assignment, her first assignment as an ancestor, I would just say on behalf of the sorority of Alpha Kappa Alpha, you did that already. So she has gone up, gotten her wings, and created opportunities. So let me just say that, and those who know. And this is part of the echo of Pam's D9 and Legacy Orgs. You know what to do.
That's right.
So I just want to say, as we honor her, I want to thank her because she has already gotten her wings and is doing the thing. Secondly, someone asked in the chat, and I just want to tag on to Professor Jerry's answer response with respect to, and again, still forgive my voice. I am thankful both for my speech therapist and my therapist who are working on my voice mentally and physically in this time that we are having right now in this nation. But I wanted to tag on to with respect to funding. Part of what we don't seem to understand in a larger context as citizens, when you ask who's funding a lot of this, many of us inadvertently are funding a lot of this. If you watch Tubi, you're funding Fox. Murdoch's own the Fox conglomerate, and the Murdochs support the Heritage Foundation, the Federalist Society, and many of the 110 organizations that have come together to form like Voltron to dismantle all of our humanity and rights. When you support many of the products that the Koch brothers, down one because one has died and the other one apparently didn't learn any lesson about how to be a better citizen in this world. Many of the products, so paper towels, tissue, a lot of the daily products that we use, because we're not connecting many of the dots of our, I would say, just rudimentary existence. So when we support a lot of the products that the Koch brothers produce, we're supporting the Heritage Foundation, the Federalist Society, the leadership, whatever you fill in the blank. Because one thing that are the Republicans, I don't even like using that term anymore because now it is so distant in time from what we understood. Many of us who are on this panel understood Republicans to mean and be in a political landscape. These are hard right MAGA, as it's been said, white supremacist, neo-Christian, fascist, authoritarian individuals. And they are going to get what they want at all costs unless we, the people, stand in the gap and ensure that we rise up, because our power is more collectively unified when we understand what is happening. When we understand what is happening and then act. So I would say we need to be really careful in every respect in areas that we are not as aware or as educated, how we may be inadvertently contributing to our own demise, and B, not being aware of the sleight of hand that happens. Because one of those responses in that mythological Twitter, it ain't us, as they were trying to say in a lot of their responses to, oh no, oh my gosh, the hand wringing and the pearl clutching, that, oh no, this is Project 25 doesn't really say. Listen to a lot of how they name their organizations. Americans for Prosperity, Council of National Policy, Freedom, fill in the blank, United on Purpose, Christian Coalition, and just put Christian with anything, and all of a sudden you co-opt a lot of African Americans in particular, just because of how we've been socialized in this country. We don't delve further. We don't, what I say a lot of times in my communications hat, we don't go beyond the headlines. So what we get caught up in is Leadership Institute, Turning Point USA, and we do not realize the damage that is being infiltrated into our society little by little, because Moms for Liberty now has your children basically without books in classrooms all across this country. And you want to understand, this is not an existential threat. This is a clear and present danger. And when we keep listening to people on various media outlets and on various podcasts and in various gatherings and collections of thought splatter, what they're not talking about with any specifics are the laws in Texas, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama, Florida, Louisiana, Georgia, Utah, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and more to join them, who have already decided there won't be parole, that if you are sitting in prison, a woman just got out of prison after 43 years, and the state's attorney still tried to keep her imprisoned, knowing that she'd been innocent. So that is shrinking in many of these states. And again, as I said 2 weeks ago, they're just using the boilerplate language, a term of art in the legal world, but most people are getting to know that term and carrying that legislation across the country. One of the things that I learned very clearly and without an adulterated understanding working for Congress was that you follow the maps and you follow the money. And these people are good at it, and then shaping a narrative, fiction as it might be, manufactured as it might be, shaping a narrative to go into those spaces where they have carved out the maps, meaning they have the numbers, or they have planted the numbers, or they have run the candidates to ensure they will have the numbers. And then they put the money in those places to now create the kind of legislation we are already seeing. Project 2025. It is not some futuristic, esoteric possibility of what might happen. It is already here again. I can run off the states and those that already have legislation ready to pop off. So my end game theory is really about us understanding, first of all, that we're already in the midst of, Oda Mae says in Ghost, America, you in danger, girl. And we have blinders on because of whatever our rationales are. Oh, this couldn't happen. This wouldn't possibly. It's just too horrific. It's just all the things that you think about as why it is not possible. You're missing the point that it's already in place. So let me say this. What I have looked through gradually through the document, and I will borrow from Trevor, is it starts with the canary in the coal mine, which is always anti-Blackness, because many of the people that you are going to co-opt don't have an understanding of history and are not interested in it. And guess what? Project 2025 rolls out more of its legalistic codified language into law. You won't even be able to discuss history and how it's impacted. I want to say the enslavement period of this country that just morphed into Jim Crow, that is now morphed into Jane Crow Esquire. You won't even be able to talk about that because that will be illegal. It will be illegal to say anti-white. See, when a lot of people talk about Project 2025 in the headlines and the bite-sized little nuggets, they talk about, oh, the national abortion ban and it's going to deport immigrants. That's not moving the needle for some people who may not be as radical as the far right wing, but may think, well, that couldn't be so bad. And Christian values, baby, they're not talking about your Christian values. So be very clear. We need to dig deeper. We need to go beneath the headline and understand terms will be illegal. And I want to say part of what I wanted to bring into this discussion, one example of how this is already frightening and in place, besides all of the possibilities that are going to happen environmentally, regulation, employment, education. Sonia Massey was shot in the face in her house because she called the police because she thought she heard a prowler, similar to Atiana Jefferson in Fort Worth several years ago, who neighbors thought there was someone who was prowling around her home because she left the door open, and shoots her in her own house with a glass between her and the police officer, and her 9-year-old nephew witnessing the entire travesty. Sonia Massey was shot because that police officer basically said to her she didn't put the boiling pot of water down the way he wanted her to. In a 2025 world, because we've already creeped towards this, he will be indemnified. Now, because it was so heinous, and when you kill us, you have to kill us in spectacular fashion to be penalized in any capacity. So because it was so heinous, he was immediately fired. The department has come out and denounced it. Now, we're just waiting to see what's going to happen. But I say to each of us, please put yourselves and your families and those you love and care about in the shoes of Sonia Massey. Because at any point under a 2025 regime, you can be shot in the face by a police officer and nothing will happen. Because militarizing the police to enact violence for protesting our rights or disagreements, which is supposed to be fundamental to how we operate in this country, will be illegal to do that. And now the military, which now it is illegal, you don't use the military on domestic soil.
Right.
Project 2025 is breaking that barrier.
Right.
It will use the military, and you've already saw a hint in that when the person who formerly occupied the White House wanted to clear the path to walk across the street with an upside down Bible to a church he probably couldn't pronounce the name of, and asked, can we just shoot them in the knee, the protesters? Can we just shoot them to clear the way? So be very clear about what is happening currently. So it is about disinformation and dissuasion. That there is a disinformation strategy that has an imposition of a nonstop campaign to limit and control Bible, books, bodies, ballots, and bullets. And that's the end game. Because when you take away employment, or you make it more difficult, or you take away education and make it more difficult, or you take away regulation, or you make it more difficult, go down any of the pillars of 2025. What you have is a depressed, oppressed, suppressed citizenry. And then guess what happens? You work for corporations for free, like we already have by thank you, sponsored by the 13th Amendment. So it's very interesting which amendments they like and which amendments they don't. Don't touch 2A, but 1A, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, separation, where there's supposed to be a wall, an erected wall between church and state, that no longer exists already currently. And now when you have imbued the powers of a king, sponsored by Clarence Thomas and his minions, then you basically now have zero rights and zero humanity in a country that you will still be, if you're still employed somewhere, dedicating some of your resources and tax dollars to. It is to solidify unchecked power. And every signer on to Project 2025 has their own motivation that is now converging and coalescing. Because again, to revisit and circle back, part of the funders are big oil. Don't touch our drilling, and don't touch our crude oil. Don't touch how we damage the environment. Don't touch how we raise prices at whim. And then somehow Jedi mind trick the American public to believe presidents control gas prices, that presidents control prices in the stores where you go buy your bread, milk, and all your fungibles and necessaries. Because as long as we can Jedi mind trick and sleight of hand, like Johnson said, if you can convince the lowliest white man that he's better than any black man, and I'm just paraphrasing, you can continue to pick his pockets.
Yes.
Project 2025 shows you that in action and is co-opting some of us with it. Please, for the sake of anything you believe in that has meaning with respect to humanity, read this document one page at a time at whatever pace you can, and don't spend any time wasted on recognizing why it is critical and important that you do not see the couch or anybody that would completely obliterate your right to exist as an option to continue forward.
Very good. And I just want to piggyback first. Okay, I just want to piggyback for a second on what Cal was saying in regards to police being indemnified and not being able to hold them accountable. Well, in particular, one of the main aims of Project 2025, if you look at what they say about the Department of Justice, that section was written by a guy named Gene Hamilton, who was a Federal Society far-right extremist lawyer who worked in the Trump administration of Homeland Security. The guy's a complete nut, just a racist, right? And this guy, what he is arguing is that, in particular, that the Department of Justice, they want to put the Department of Justice, it's right now it's independent, put it under the purview of the president of the administration. But what they want to do also is to strip the Civil Rights Division of any enforcement powers, in particular enforcing civil anti-discrimination laws, the voting rights, and in many jurisdictions where you may have like a case where police officers accused of violating someone's civil rights by killing them, and so there's like local prosecutions, state prosecutions that may not work, so you have to go to the federal government and have then with under Project 2025, and what the Republicans have to do, they will strip the Civil Rights Division of its ability to hold accountable for federal civil rights violations. So we have no protection, not local, not state, not federal, from police officers, who may be malevolent and who brutalize and even kill people. There'll be no accountability. So just like the cop who killed George Floyd, that was also a federal civil rights case. And then this wouldn't have happened. And in particular, when you look at these southern states, just like you have like with voting rights, you now have these states like these third world Confederate states like Texas and Louisiana and Alabama and Georgia, where it's hard to get any kind of victory in civil rights cases, voting rights cases. You have to have the federal government come in and sue them. Well, during the Trump administration, they didn't enforce the civil rights laws, and now it's not a matter of not enforcing. They will strip the Department of Justice from having even the ability to enforce. They would gut it, and you can be sure, as dollars to donuts, they will have some black faces, representing the civil rights, because throughout our history here, we've always had black people who they can pay off and grift, and who are just selfish and filled with self-hatred, like Clarence Thomas and
Byron Donalds.
Byron Donalds. You were talking about earlier about the whole. I saw something about the whole happy slave narrative. Right, that's basically what Byron Donalds talking about during Jim Crow. Black families were stronger, or something like But also one last thing I want to say about the Department of Justice and what Project 2025, and what they also want to do, they want to strip the authorities from the FBI. And one of the agencies within the FBI that they want to do away with is an agency that monitors disinformation.
Oh my God!
They want to strip that agency of its ability, and they want to defund it. And it monitors disinformation campaigns against American citizens. Like I said, that's why I keep comparing, what these people to these Eastern European neo-Nazis and far right, either whether it's Hungary or these other far right, because that they are part of the same kind of psycho-political, ideology. And these people don't consider themselves to be Americans as far as part of like a pluralistic, multiracial society. These are white supremacists like you have out of apartheid South Africa. I mean, that's literally who you're talking about, and that's what you have to keep in mind. You can't win their hearts and minds. You can't appeal to their rationale. These are aggressively hostile, racist people who want to subjugate Black people because we are not white.
And may I add, Pam, if possible, that when I say the endgame theory, that essentially, in a nutshell, it is categorically a playbook to demolish and dismantle every system, pillar, or institution that scaffolds citizenship and the participation of citizenship. So again, to tag on to Trevor, part of what was already being heard by the Supreme Court, and part of it was ruled on. And again, we gloss over these rulings, not understanding how they absolutely impact I guess when people say politics, I'm not into politics or politics doesn't affect. No, politics will do you whether you do politics or not. So you can participate or you can get played. So we keep acting, and then the other side of that is we seem to be in this consistent abusive relationship with individuals who we know mean us no good. It's like the people who keep coming back saying, "Oh, but they're going to change this time." Well, oh my goodness, he said, she said. Okay, let's look at this long arc of history now abutted by, adjacent to, a spelled out document, a manifesto that they're allowing us to see. They could have kept this undercover. They've been working on it for more than 25 years, which
But
also people don't understand. In the social media world, we think everything happened an hour ago or yesterday.
yeah,
They've been working on this honestly since Brown v. Board was passed.
yeah.
And if we want to go back further, since we were released from chains, because because these are the descendants of the descendants of the descendants. Be very clear who these people are. I cannot echo Trevor enough. But back to just to revisit a little bit of, again, the handmaiden to the new king that they want to install. The Supreme Court, again, with Clarence Thomas and all of the minions, -3. One of the cases was about the cases that are brought as amicus. So for legal ease, friends of the court. So a lot of voting rights cases are brought by organizations that sign on to a case that is already in play, and then they're just saying basically, you if you come against them, you come against us, in layman's terms. So all these amicus briefs that essentially are like, again, follow the maps, follow the money. A lot of those briefs by those organizations, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, ACLU, you name it, very similar organizations. Now, what the court is deciding on little by little is that they won't have standing to bring those cases. So any voting rights dispute, which is normally brought by the organizations because they typically have the funding. If I go to my local precinct and vote and something happens and I am denied voting, I'm not normally positioned as one individual. And not that it does not happen, but certainly as one individual to then bring a lawsuit that can move through the court systems with all of the various vagaries of how decisions are made, and more importantly, the cost of doing such. Those organizations settle as a foundational scaffold to ensure that some of the most heinous, particularly voting rights obstructionists, are brought into the court system. The Supreme Court, little by little, because they've already decided part of this while we were all still asleep, and decided, oh no, they won't have standing. That we won't have jurisdictions. We won't hear those cases anymore. So whole states now, wholesale, quicker than the 250 states that could not wait to enact voting rights. Not really. Laws in all the various states that enacted all of those 250 laws that they could not wait to put in place once the essentially Section 2 was gutted. Imagine how quickly once this last piece falls. So again, it is about dismantling and demolishing the scaffolds of citizenship. You cannot vote. You cannot work where we don't say you can work. You cannot receive any kind of necessary benefits if you have earned them or if you're just down on hard times. You cannot tell us about the cancer alley that is running through generationally some property that you essentially have no other way of moving away from or relocating from, because how impoverished for 3-4 generations your family has been, and the sickness and illness that has come from the deregs, from the air, the water, the land, the soil. It will be a one big so what. This is about unabashed, unvarnished power. And again, the interest, for whatever the reason, it is very disturbing to me because I don't have the capacity to think this way. This unsatisfied, unsatiated need to subjugate other humans.
And you know what? It's just this, and then the greed, the utter greed of it all.
Absolutely.
Elon Musk, he did a big layoff not too long ago, and yet I saw Trump bragging about, yeah, Elon, he's such a great guy. He's giving me $45 million a month. Can you, $45 million a month? And you have states that have not extended Medicaid to their people because they don't want to pay for something that they have the monies to take care of their people.
Or free lunch to their children, even though the government was subsidizing it, like Louisiana.
Yeah.
Again, these third world Confederate states.
Yeah, just no free lunch or whatever. And the killer is that it's not just Black and brown people. It's a whole lot of white folks that are poor.
Well, they don't seem to understand they're going to be collateral damage.
Exactly.
Because again, if I can convince you of, the LBJ's quote and absurdities and atrocities go hand in hand once I have co-opted your mind.
Yeah.
They don't realize they will be collateral damage.
I don't know who Simon Says is. You're somebody new I've never seen in here, but you have the whole book of Project 2025 in front of you. You've been calling out pages and the whole thing. I'm impressed. I'm very impressed. Professor Gershenhorn, our history man, is there any moment in time in any history that can help us figure out how are we going to get out of this? The only thing that I can think of right now is that we have to vote our way out of this thing. We have to literally vote our way out of this mess. It won't take away the hate and the vitriol and all of that stuff. That won't go away. But we have to appeal to people in some kind of way to make them understand your life is really in danger. This is not people yelling fire, my ear's on fire, and it's not. This is for real, for real.
Oh yeah, you're right. There is an opportunity to stop this, but people need to mobilize, and we need to get out the vote. I was talking to a friend of mine today, and I think I need to hit the streets myself, and just get out our voters, because you're not going to be able to convince some people. Obviously, they don't care about democracy. Arguing that Trump is anti-democratic, small d democratic doesn't mean anything to a lot of this group. They, as KL said, and several others of you have said, it's about power. They want the power to do what they will. But, and the only way to stop them is to deny them that power. And, is to get out the vote of those like-minded people who don't want to end our democracy and don't want, Black and brown people and working class people and gay people and immigrants to be, to be denied all their rights, one end to the other. One thing I never understood, I guess there's a lot of things I can't understand now because of the mess, the Trumpers have put us in, is how can a young person, because I know some young people, how could young people vote for somebody who denies climate change? I'm not going to be here that much longer. But if you're 20 years old, how can you tell me that you're not going to be concerned about floods and hurricanes and tornadoes and, 150 degree, there was an article in the Times today about, the ground temperature and pavement being 150 degrees. People who touch the pavement are burned and going into the hospital. And that's now. Think about 20 years with drill, baby drill, with Trump. So I just don't get, I guess when you're young, maybe you don't think about the future, or some people are not thinking about the future.
Can I respond to that
Yes.
before Trevor hops in? I see he's off mute as
I'm
well.
not speaking about all young people, obviously.
No, I know. And most young voters in this country, although things are changing by the minute, I think still vote more liberally. But I can tell you that my answer would be something that KL mentioned earlier, and I'm going to hopefully tie a few points here together. But she said earlier that we don't read beyond the headlines and we fall victim to these marketing messages that I think we need to call them out as effective. That RNC I watched every night of the Republican National Convention. That thing was done well. The thing was produced to a T. Trump came out there with that big old gauze pad on his ear.
That
And
maxi pad.
they ate it up.
Exactly.
And so I want to just respond directly to you, Professor Gershenhorn, and say that, yes, voting is important, which is why I'm going to do everything I can to get my peers to vote in November, really during early voting, so before November, but up and down the ballot, both sides. Because right now, markedly so, or appropriately so, we're talking about the presidency, we're talking about the vice presidency, but we also have judges in these states that are up. We also have local officials and statewide officials who really need to be talked about and really need to be voted into office, because we need all this federal policy, hopefully progressive federal policy, to trickle down and be implemented by local officials who do care about justice and progress. So I'll start there. I'll also say that it's important to when we're talking about the RNC and Trump, it's important to note that Trump and his people are scared of a Kamala Harris presidency.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is such a turning point moment, because she's, more progressive than Trump is. I'll put it that way. She's younger than Trump is. She's a Black woman. She also has she's pretty. She's beautiful. She has Asian heritage, and they've been prepping for Joe Biden. So don't let them, folks in the chat, folks watching online, don't let them okie doke you, as President Obama said, and tell you, oh, we're going to take Kamala down. We know what they're going to do. They're going to play those race cards.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they can't really overplay their hand when it comes to criminal justice, because he's a criminal and she's going to prosecute him. I mean, this story writes itself. And so to Professor Gershenhorn's point, it's important that young people in particular who do have any common sense understand that this is a very pivotal election. And I'll close by saying, I think Willa Sample said this earlier in the chat, but, Stephen Miller, who's a Duke grad, is just a terrible person. I'm sure he's all over this Project 2025 stuff. He orchestrated the terrible immigration policy of the Trump administration.
From their parents.
Right, separating kids from their parents at the border. And I think it must be said that Project 2025 and Kamala Harris running right now, both of those two things are going to have an outsized effect or impact on Black Americans and brown Americans. If you care about your Black and brown neighbors, you cannot in good conscience vote for Trump. I mean, this is not 2020 anymore. This is not 2016 anymore. We see that Trump pulls that okie doke stuff all the time. Remember, I think I mentioned this 2 weeks ago when the CNN and NBC were running all these interviews with these white farmers out in the Midwest, and they thought that Trump was going to be their guy, and he didn't do diddly squat for them. And so Pam said earlier, I think, or maybe KL, that poor white people are in the same boat here with a lot of other marginalized Americans. And so we need to, yes, create a message of unity, but we need to be united in our pursuit of justice and not united in a mindset like that of those who took over the Capitol on January 6, 2021.
God.
And I would also say civics by fiat is what's also killing the understanding and recognition of how the operation of each branch of government impacts every aspect of our lives. Again, you can choose not to do politics. Politics will do you. Yeah. So to not understand that we need every state house, we need every state executiveship, meaning the governor. We need every school board position. Mm-hmm. We are catching up to the strategy that has been in place again for 25 to 50 plus years. And part of it began by taking over state houses and school boards.
School boards. Yes.
School boards.
Yes.
School boards. I was on an election commission for a school district. And the kinds of things that I was privy to hearing because a lot of them did not, in that district, they didn't really look like me. So I got to hear things that, again, I guess I was invisible. They felt very comfortable saying, and that was over 20 years ago. So again, we're seeing the trajectory of this playing out, but we have to take responsibility and accountability. Understand why it's important to vote down ballot, why it's important that we not only capture the House and the Senate, but that we have numbers so large a margin that we don't have to worry about someone deciding they're going to change their party, which I also have issues with in terms of how we allow that to happen when the people have spoken based on believing you were going to bring policies forward and their beliefs and ideals and values forward based on voting for you in one party. And then you decide personally that you're going to shift parties for your own welfare, good, windfall, whatever happens. I mean, I've heard many Congress people say they went into Congress without money and came out millionaires. So we need to be very, very astute about who we're hiring and firing. We need to start thinking about these people not as the honorable fill in the blank. And again, I worked for Congress. I've worked at every level of a campaign, finance, state level, federal level, local level, federal. What I am saying is we need to take accountability for understanding what these positions do so we know what to ask for and how to frame it, ask for it, and take the money and march up to get it. We're not doing that. And that's why when we show up at 2 seconds before we're supposed to be at the ballot box asking what did someone do for us or not do for us, no, what did you ask for? What were the policies or the legislation boilerplate that you and a group put together and crafted and took that into your legislator's office at the state level, took that up to your federal congressperson's local office and said, this is what we would like to have done? Because what you're seeing are the outcomes when there's all these rumblings and layperson speak conversations about, well, these people got this and these people got that. You need to go below the headlines. How did that happen? You cannot do civics by reading headlines. We need the House, we need the Senate, and we need both of those in addition to the executive presidency to ensure that we get back the judiciary. Because right now, it is a hot, bought-off mess. They are wholesale subsidiaries of the Heritage Foundation and all of its signers on to 2025. And we seem to not be connecting the dots. As one of my favorite pop culture persons says, and who, if you know, the continents are not meeting. And that is on us.
Yeah. I think that's so true. I mean, I also think that you're right, KL, that we're approaching this new, or I guess we're in this new age and era where people are starting to understand the plan, which is great. But the next question is, what are you going to do about it? I mean, we saw even Bernie and AOC come out and surprise folks and say, hey, I'm with Biden. I don't agree with him on everything. A few weeks ago, I don't agree with him on everything. But when it comes to climate, when it comes to, finances, this dude is way better than the alternative. And, AOC was one of those people, right, who didn't come from much and now has a lot of money. And so people have always questioned, what is she going to do with her power and platform? And it seems like she's doing her best to continue calling out people who come before her in Congress and support Biden and now Harris. They've both come out and say Kamala Harris needs to be the top contender. And so I think it's important, that last point you made, KL, and that's a young person, I'll speak to it. And I love how we keep it playing on this platform, Pam. The same people that often, not always, but often have issues with these candidates or at the last minute say, oh, I'm not going to vote because they're not for me. You didn't pay attention. You didn't pay attention in civics class. You didn't pay attention in 6th grade social studies class. So you're saying Kamala Harris is locking people up, but you can't even spell jail. So what are we talking about here? If you want to have a serious political policy focused conversation, let's do it. And I understand, trust me, I understand that for so long, politicians have only cared about lining their pockets. And we have coonish Black politicians, I'll say it, and Clarence Thomas and Mark Robinson, who keeps popping up in the chat, but I think I'm ignoring it because that name is just evokes such a visceral reaction from me. The lieutenant governor in North Carolina, who many people are tying to Project 2025, and rightfully so. Now is the time. Right now is the time for folks to do their educating. That's why we're talking about Project 2025 tonight, to go after and seek what are the policies, what are the issues, what do you care about? If you don't want to get political, what do you care about? Who matters to you in your community? And if you can tell me that Donald Trump or the majority of this current crop of Republicans are the best folks for you, I mean, I'm going to tell you you're wrong, but okay. But get down into the weeds and do your best to understand what's going on before November 4th, or whatever day election day is this year. Don't come at the last minute talking about 5th. November 5th is election day. Don't come talking at the last second about, oh, I just never really vibed with Kamala, or I don't know, she's just a, puppet of
Unserious.
show. Get real.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to pick a good vice presidential nominee, I believe that, candidate. And let's make sure that we are doing our best to uphold this democracy. I can tell you that young people are energized right now, and I hope they go beyond social media. I hope they do their work and educate themselves right now so that we can have a winning campaign, not just for the Democrats, but for marginalized people in this country come November.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to share with you guys this one little clip. I said I was going to do it. I meant to do it earlier, but the chat blew up and it's still blowing up. But I gotta show you this of our crazy guy. Not our guy, but you know who he is. Okay.
The hell it is Project 45. He's involved in Project, and then they read some of the things that they are extreme. I mean, they're seriously extreme. But I don't know anything about it. I don't want to know anything about it. But what they do is misinformation and disinformation, and they keep saying, he's a threat to democracy. I'm saying, what the hell did I do for democracy? Last week, I took a bullet for democracy.
Now, with that said, I have been on the case of several of my journalist friends because they have not reported anything about what really happened to Trump. The first report, and I believe it was just it was glass from the teleprompter that hit his ear and cut it. Makes perfect sense for the amount of blood we saw and his lack of real reaction to it. Had a bullet actually grazed his ear, a chunk of his ear would have come off, something of his ear would have come off, okay? And it would have been extremely painful, and it would have been more bloody. We saw a picture of his ear because there were photographers, and it was just it was a bloody ear, was a cut. You didn't see anything deformed about it. Also, too, he went played golf the next day without the maxi pad on his ear. He put the maxi pad on when he was doing theatrics for the RNC. So what he is, he's a showman. We know that. He is, he is reality TV gold. Because that's
Pam, my main thing on that, sorry to interrupt you, is why have we not heard from the doctors who treated him yet?
Exactly.
And I don't know. I'm not going to speculate about
president, and you're supposed to be able to come out and make a statement. There's usually a statement. We had to insert this many stitches. Right. The former president will be okay. He's recuperating. Because I'm finding it difficult to understand how a high-powered was an AR-14 or AK-4, whichever one of those it is, and forgive my ignorance as to the gun models. I'm glad I don't know that well, but trust everybody on that dais, on that stage, would have been blown back.
Right. And I think this goes back to this conversation about truth and honesty, right? Mark Lee just put in the chat that Trump's doctor, quote unquote, did put out a statement, but it was Ronnie Jackson, his former doctor, who's not even really certified anymore. And so we're just supposed to take these people's words, on their face. It doesn't make any sense. But as somebody said in the chat, to keep us on track, this is about Project 2025 and democracy. And Trump is really just a conduit for anti-democratic values. It's really not about him, whether he got shot or not. Not to mention the person who shot him is a registered Republican. So let's stop with the okie doke and let's get down to what matters, what can be verified, and that is that Project 2025 is bad. I'm sorry, Trevor. I don't mean to keep cutting you off.
No, I was
Or maybe
I was going to comment.
I would just go back to the point about Trump denying that he knows who they are. He always does that. And what bothers me a lot is that the media plays his BS, and they just and they repeat what he says even after all these years. We know that a number of these guys. I mean, one of these guys, I was looking back. This guy Thomas Homan, who spoke at the Republican National Convention, just a few days ago. He was the acting director of ICE during the Trump administration, and he was one of the primary architects of the breaking up the families, separating children from their parents at the border for immigrants. And when he was criticized for that, and this is a direct quote, he says, "I don't care about immigrant families. I don't give a shit." And he was one of the writers of the Heritage Foundation report, and he spoke at the convention. Russell Vought, former director of Office of Management and Budget under Trump, he was one of the writers of the Project 2025. And Trevor already mentioned another example. He knows these guys very well, and in fact, he's spoken glowingly of them on other occasions.
Right.
And so because there's a little bit of pushback against Project 2025, now of course he doesn't know them.
Right.
He didn't know anybody else he knows. He didn't know. I mean, there's just so many people.
He didn't know Eugene Carroll.
Right.
He didn't know.
Right.
Fill in the blank.
I mean, I read a good, interesting quote recently that, when he lies all the time, it's an effective tool because, like several of you said, a lot of people don't look below the headline and they just see these lies. And even if they think some of them are lies, then it becomes the assumption, all politicians lie. No politician lies like Donald Trump.
Nobody.
And he's in a place by himself.
Yes.
And regretfully, that's become so normalized by just this one individual that we do end up having these reverberations throughout culture that shift and move the goalposts instead of calling it out, which should have happened in 2016. The media should have been on its job in terms of journalism.
Yes.
Not commentators and people who want to be part of the story themselves, who want to have shows with their names on them. We needed so much that rail, that pivotal rail that holds us together. We needed those sharp-minded, clear-sighted journalists to have been allowed to be able to speak that things that were being said were not true. They were searching desperately for new terms for lie.
Right.
Instead of just calling it what it was and what we all heard and understood was happening. We needed the media to be full and clear-throated as part of, again, its anchor and place in this society, because now this is the blowback for all of that time that people weren't using that particularly important role to suss out what was fact and what was not. I don't understand Earth 2 where there's alternative facts.
I don't either.
If you tell me water is wet, we can have a conversation about all of the applications of that. When you start telling me water is not wet, there are no two sides.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, guys, Trevor, did you have anything you wanted to say lastly?
Well, I was just saying, look, this is once again a very enlightening conversation. I'm glad we had this part two. I think many people were interested in getting our thoughts, and I think that we provided them some really helpful information. And again, I guess the only thing I want to do is just once again emphasize the importance of listening with a very discerning ear when these people talk, because like I said, they are flagrant liars. I mean, like I said, I'm not going to say they tell mistruths, they obfuscate the truth. They are flagrant liars and manipulators That's why they want to do away with with an agency within the FBI that focuses on disinformation. That's why they want to do away with the civil rights enforcement civil rights law, so they can say that it's not a violation of law to discriminate. And not only that, not only are they doing away with the statutes and enforcement protocols, right? But they also want to even ban discussion when it comes to sexual orientation, any kind of DEI, right? And just stop for a minute, just think for a minute. As people of color and Jerry, you working, bulk of your career, at a university with people of color, that the fact that they're focusing like a laser beam on denying Black history, not denying Asian history, not denying Hispanic history, not denying Jewish history, but Black history, to the extent that a teacher could be fired, if they violate these rules that they're going to impose upon. That shows like a special imprisoned. Right. There's a special imprisoned for teaching Black history. That's a special kind of contempt. I mean, that remember I said these people are throwbacks to the proto-fascists, who the Nazis learned from. But actually, you can go further back. They are the people who brutalized and killed and beat and chopped up Black people who wanted to learn how to read. Right. That's who they are. These are the people who, when we were lynched and hanging from trees, had picnics, underneath our dead bodies. That's who these people are. This is no exaggeration. This is no hyperbole. This is what they are the spawn of that generation of white Americans who have like a supernatural hatred for us as Black people. If you would think that we've been here for all these years and yet they still want to knock us back into the second-class citizenship, and reinforce this whole caste system. And so there's a particular kind of malice towards African Americans, throughout Project 2025. But again, like I said, you absolutely will be able to. You'll see them plucking up Black people, certain Black people who are grifters, and paying them off to try to sugarcoat this nonsense. Well, it's not even nonsense because that understates it. That doesn't give it the urgency that it deserves. But the point I'm making is that we are not dealing with normal conservative people who you may have disagreements on economics policy, tax policy. You may even have different agreements on some civil rights issues, but it's a matter of strategy, how you get there versus not getting there at all and subjugating us as African Americans. Again, these are very vicious, violent, and the ones who call themselves conservative Christians, they're not Christians, they're heretics. Nothing about them. They are the people who made those Black Bibles in the 19th century, 20th century, where they took out any kind of reference to liberation and opposition to slavery and left stuff in there about obeying your masters. That's who these people are. That's the kind of propaganda that they want. Remember, Ron DeSantis, earlier this year was talking about, the benefits of slavery, but I'm saying, but this is the mentality of the people who put together this plan. And so don't be fooled by them because, they may seem sophisticated to the extent they wear ties and they may articulate themselves well. They are monstrous people who hate us. They hate our children. They hate our grandchildren. They hate our ancestors, and they hate our very future. And you need to keep that in mind every time you see Trump and J.D. Vance and those people on television trying to peddle their poison to us.
Right. Listen, guys, I am so thankful for all of you for showing up, you guys in the chat. You guys blew up the chat tonight with such great commentary and questions. And some people, I don't know who you are, which is a good thing. It's good to get new audience members and what have you. And I so thank my panelists for being so willing to come back. We've been on here for an hour and 38 minutes. And I appreciate you guys for staying over time, because this is just so important. Everybody, please share the video. Share it in your networks, as Judy Foster Davis said in the chat. Share so that we can get momentum going and to help our whole process for marching towards November. Information is power. None of these people, we're not being paid to do anything. We're just here trying to spread a message and educate people, and that's what we have to do for all of us. We do.
That's
so
right. Pam, they're saying in the chat we need a part 3. If we're gonna do that, we might want to ask them to fundraise in the chat. But I'll do it. I'll do it for a little something.
I don't see a part. I don't see. We need a part. Oh, I see Delta Girl 17. We need a part 3. Well, you know what? We'll have another discussion of some sort, because I wasn't thinking of doing another show this next Sunday because it's so close to NABJ and I've got all this stuff to prepare for that, for the National Association of Black Journalists Conference. But I think I'm almost compelled to try to, because something's going to happen between now and Sunday with this whole race for Vice President Kamala Harris, and maybe I'll do something on that. I don't know. We'll see.
Maybe if they just like and subscribe and share the show so much, they might see some of us on the national platform.
That's right. That's right, guys. Please do that. Please thumbs up my YouTube channel, and thumbs up wherever you're listening from, whether it's Facebook or even LinkedIn. Sometimes my LinkedIn thing, I don't see people from there, and then I go back later and I see, oh, you guys watched it, or people hit the replay. At any rate, it's all of the videos are archived here on YouTube, and you can go back and see the part 1 and the part 2 and all of that good stuff, and other things too. I appreciate each and every one of you panelists. Thank you so much. I appreciate you all so much. And let's just wave good night to everyone. Good night, everyone. Thank you.